Hey, welcome to my basement, everybody. I have got a couple of very cool guests for you today. Seth Fulkerson, who has created something incredibly original, and Audi Sorlie from Limited Run Games and also Digital Foundry. You might know him from Digital Foundry. They have both joined me today to talk about Arzette, the Jewel of Faramore. And this is a spiritual sequel or successor to the Seedy Eye Legend of Zelda games that nobody talks about anymore, that have a bit of a stink on them. But Seth, you saw something beautiful in those classic games and decided to veer back into that territory. Why?
Well, why not, right? No, yeah, like you said, I think that the general gameplay loop of those games and the art style and the sometimes silly cutscenes, I think they're inherently, I think they have a lot of inherent potential. So really wanted to lock onto that and just sort of explore that potential.
Now, did you play those original? You would have been so young when those things came out. How did
Yes,
you come to find them?
I have
Or
played
were you
them.
even alive then? Were you born when they were originally released?
I was 1 year old, yeah.
Oh my god!
But
Oh
yeah.
no.
Audi's 6 years older than me. Just to get that out of the way. Anyway, so yeah, I was introduced to the games the same way a lot of other people were. The memes, the video remixes, all that kind of stuff. But I have like a soft spot for sort of like bad, underloved games. So
Yes.
you know, I wanted to kind of like look more into why they were like that. Why did they look like that? And yeah, I found the story behind them really like inspiring, you know, like sort of the limitations they had to go through to make the game even work on that console.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I eventually just got into seeing them for kind of what they were and not what everybody else was seeing them for, I guess. And yeah, that's just sort of how I got really into them, I guess you could say.
Well, I got to tell you, like I was very much alive when the CDI came out, and you know, I was getting kind of back into games in a huge way because I'd gone to high school and university and got into acting and stuff. But the games started to pull me right back in. So I had the NES and the Genesis and the Super Nintendo, and back then it was like, that's so expensive. I mean, it looked cool, this CDI thing and this new technology, but who's got money for that? And I felt similarly about the 3DO, which I eventually did get, but the CDI just seemed like a great idea at an exorbitant price and just out of reach for me as a game fan. Audi, you guys are at Limited Run, and I think also with your, you know, historical analysis of Digital Foundry, you're really digging into games that you know, have a reputation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for the Zelda games, so when it came out, I was 10, 11 years old, and I remember seeing them at so I'm from Europe, but they had these display cases of like the expensive consoles, like the 3DO, the CDI, these kind of like, they were very much promoted as
the Neo Geo.
Kind of similar to Neo Geo, where it was like the high-end consoles. And I always found them fascinating. I always loved experimentation in video gaming, still do. And I remember they had like the CDI Zelda games there, and I was just like, man, like they talk, they animate, like how are they doing this? And I was very intrigued by them. And yeah, to Seth's point, you know, they do have a reputation for sure. But as I play them, I've always tried to look at the more interesting aspects of game development, old and new. And there is a lot of interesting kind of, despite the limitations, the hand-painted backgrounds, the animations, as well as just kind of the progression methods that the game uses, the mechanics of that. You can see that fundamentally there's a lot to the game that works at the core, but it's just the technical aspects of the CDI makes it completely impossible to actually perform what they're trying to do, which you know, it's not the fault of the developer necessarily.
Yeah, it's too reductive to you know, just paint the picture that people set out to make crap games, you know.
Exactly.
And we all know this, and I hadn't ever played those games, but in preparation for this conversation today, I did watch a bunch of video on those classic games. And the one thing that definitely stood out for me, and I think this is what you guys are really leaning into with Arzette, is the animated cut sequences are crazy and very unique. They remind me a little bit of the what is the Frank Bakshi Lord of the Rings? Yes, a little bit of that. Yes. Is that kind of what they were going for, do you think?
I think there's an element of that. I think rotoscoping has been the method of animation since, the 30s and 40s to save money, basically. It is a cheaper form of animation. So I think that's kind of one of the reasons. And it creates this very otherworldly effect. Like you mentioned Ralph Bakshi, which is a really good comparison. Where... yeah, those animations in the original Zelda Seedy Eye Games are very noted for being somewhat sinister and weird. Because there is, there's a sense of, realism to the way they move and act, but everything they do is surreal and just, unlike anything
hyper accentuated.
Yeah.
And the camera's moving, which makes it looks cool. Like when I was watching, I was like, wow, this is gutsy, they went for something, which is cool.
And that's actually one of the things for the Seedy Eye that people don't note so much. And this is not going to be the Seedy Eye apology tour, I promise. But, I always had a fascination of that console. And one of the things that it can do better than even sometimes the PlayStation is video playback. And forms of video playback. It had different methods. And, these are bitmap graphics that is being projected on screen, transparent ones, which... they look super crisp and clean. They scale up perfectly today if you use something like a RetroTink. They just look... there's very little artifacting. There's very little noise on a Seedy Eye video picture, especially if they have that cartridge. So that, they did utilize something there that should we have ported the game to another console, it probably wouldn't have looked as good, I guess, if that's the word you can use.
Wouldn't have looked as crisp. Seth, how did you even play these freaking games then? I mean, you were one. I assume your parents didn't give you one of these things for your first birthday.
No, it was a lot later.
Victor doesn't even know yet. Tell him, Seth. Tell him what you did.
What I did?
Well, no, I know you did the remastered.
Yeah, okay.
I know you did that. But how did you play the originals? How did you even get the why? Why did you play? And how did you play them?
Well, I did a long time ago. I did try emulating them, but as anyone who's aware of Seedy Eye emulation, it didn't go very well. So
it's not very popular or something.
Yeah, this is one of those cases where This is one of those cases where you gotta suck it up and you gotta buy a Seedy Eye if you want to play it. So
and those are not cheap.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. So when I first had the idea to make the fan-made remasters, I was like, well, I have to actually really play through these. So back then, I was able to get a imported Seedy Eye player for $150, $160. It wasn't that expensive back then. So that's how I was able to first play them. And ever since then,
when was that? When was
that? Was 2016, 2015. So.
Okay, and that was your first inclination, and did you watch some YouTube videos? And you went, these, okay.
Yeah, I had watched YouTube videos before, but that's the first time I got to actually play them and be like, oh, I get it. The ideas are there. It's very apparent to see what they were going for.
Right.
But especially, I didn't have the gamepad back then. There's a special gamepad for the Seedy Eye, for those that aren't aware.
Okay.
That looks kind of like a Genesis controller. I didn't use that. I used what looked like a TV remote to play, and if anyone has tried to do that, it doesn't work. So,
poor man.
Again, it's the technical limitations of the system that really held the games back. I think more than anything else. There's obviously, if you look into the story of the development, they weren't given a lot of time, they weren't given a lot of money, and they had to make it work on this.
Nor system. Support from Nintendo, other than they had the license, right? Nintendo didn't have anything to do with these games.
Nope, they looked at them and said, "Yeah, it looks good." and and that's.
I don't think they even looked. I don't think they looked at them. And can you imagine today a company? Philips was a conglomerate at the time. They still are big, but
oh yeah.
Can you imagine being in a situation where, because of a fallout, it's like, okay, you have this one-time usage of our IPs. Even by 1991, I mean, Mario and Zelda were household names, and they squandered it. How?
Yeah.
Why didn't they put I would have looked at that and just be like, let's give them, several $1 million and just develop something amazing for it.
I think they just wanted to move on. I think they just wanted to move past it.
Yeah, I mean, if there was no partnership there to be had, for sure. The question I have is, why would Nintendo not just pay them out of that? Nobody could make a Fantastic Four movie without Marvel and Disney. Even if there were previous rights attached to something, Marvel and Disney would stop that. And I don't think a Nintendo of today would honor a past partnership to create anything if it was going to make one of their IP look bad.
I think there's probably documentation on this, but I think it was something where, because of the way they pulled out of that deal so immediately and then went with Sony, which also ended on rather bad terms, it was like, I think Philips probably wanted to retain whatever they could and make use of it for their CDI. The CDI came out and it was much more of an entertainment hub than it was a gaming console. The gaming situation with CDI was secondary and something that kind of fell
So it was like an Xbox One.
Yeah. History repeats itself there. One of the reasons why CDI software is so generally, let's say, complicated is that the system can only run things in software. There is no hardware in that system to help something like sprites, tiles. Everything runs in software. And
that's crazy. Was it streaming all off of the CD, or did it load into memory?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and that's why you have a RAM digital cartridge that came out later, which sometimes has an effect on games that they run slightly better. Some can't be played without it. But you can just imagine that you release a 32-bit system that runs completely in software circa 1992. You're not going to get very far with it. You're going to get Hotel Mario, and I think that's basically where you're going to land.
That's crazy. You know what? I would imagine that many of our listeners and viewers don't know exactly what the hell we're talking about here with Nintendo and Philips and Sony. Audi, you want to take a crack at it? What went down right around that time?
So during the development of the Super Nintendo, or rather after the development of it, there was an expansion port on it, which was going to turn into a CD system, much like the Mega CD / Sega CD. Sorry, I'm European, so I used the Mega moniker. And Nintendo was very much going to compete on that level, doing CD-based software. Games like Secret of Mana was developed for that specifically, and then ported back to cartridge when this fell out. And their partner for this was Philips, who had been instrumental in doing the CD technology. They were one of the pioneers of it. For whatever reason, with Sony,
right?
Yeah, and for whatever reason here, there was a kind of last-minute decision from Nintendo to go with Sony and do what was then called the Super Nintendo PlayStation, which there is prototypes of it out there. I think now someone has one that goes to conventions. I did get to see it at some point, but this was also canceled and then turned into the actual PlayStation, which came to bite Nintendo pretty hard in the backside. So that's basically the gist of it, was that Nintendo and Philips had an official agreement to do a CD peripheral for the Super Nintendo, and Nintendo at the time were pretty cutthroat and did things very much to the beat of their own drum. So they pulled out that deal without Philips really understanding or knowing what was going on.
And do you think the Sony, I mean, this is all conjecture, but do you think that the Sony and Nintendo being in Japan had something to do with it?
Could very much be. And Sony also at the time Sony had different divisions. I think there was more lucrative opportunities with Sony.
Right.
Something that, when the PlayStation came out, especially in Japan, John Lemon and I did an episode about the launch of PlayStation across all regions.
Yeah.
And during that research, it was very very apparent, that the connection Sony had to the world of music via Sony BGM and things like this really made a huge impact on how PlayStation was perceived.
Dude, Michael Jackson was at the Sony E3 party in 1995. I was 10 feet away from him walking down it was surreal. And Sony had Hollywood. I mean, that party was at the Sony Pictures studio lot, and like every party that they would have at E3 would be like Foo Fighters or whatever. Back one year, it was always just this connection to the clout that they had. Always,
Yeah, all Philips had was the Seedy Eye bus. There was a touring bus in Netherlands that you could play the Seedy Eye on. Michael Jackson was not on that bus as far as I know, unfortunately. I think there was probably stuff like that, as well as just business reasons why this all fell out. But the result of that was, as we mentioned earlier, Philips had some agreement there that they could make use of Mario and Zelda. And I think Donkey Kong as well was on that list, but no game.
Wild. Was there a time limit attached to that? Did they have
probably?
Was it? Yeah. So that's
probably the limitation.
There, and that's going to speak to the quality of the software too.
Oh
right? The devs didn't have the time.
Yeah, there is that Mario game that never came out, but the prototype exists, which is Mario's Wacky Worlds, which was going to be a sequel to Super Mario World on the CDI.
Wow.
It doesn't play great, but it exists, much like everything else on the CDI.
Yeah. So
it
exists,
yeah. That's what I love about the CDI is that it exists.
It exists.
We have to look at the positives.
There's some parallels with 3DO as well, right?
Yeah,
and it definitely
and
feels
Jaguar.
And Jaguar. Yeah, it feels like without all of these attempts, we don't get the PlayStation.
No,
without
not.
Everybody kind of trailblazing and kind of proving it out. And then Sony has all of this anecdotal evidence that they can point to their stakeholders and investors.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible. We just need to iterate and clean it up and come out there and do it. And right up to the launch of PlayStation 1, there was so much infighting with the US division and the Japanese division on pricing. It was not, in Canada, in Vancouver, it was really hard to get any software when the PlayStation 1 launched. It wasn't, and peripherals and stuff. We had to drive into the US to go and buy some launch games and stuff like that. It was not just a clean Sony takes over the world thing. It was a very difficult deal.
Yeah, I think it's been a bit revisionist on that part in terms of like Saturn and PlayStation, the pricing at E3, all that kind of but it wasn't as clean of a release for PlayStation. And before PlayStation even came out, even like people like Nintendo and whatnot kept saying they're not a game company, so they won't succeed. And I remember hearing this kind of from school ground kids, and this was kind of a thing where Sony's they're not gonna do what they want to do.
Console war BS in the magazines, all the interviews,
all that stuff. So, why are we here again? Are we here to talk about a game or something?
It's all part of the discussion here, though, right? Like it led us to.
Led us to the 3DO.
Nintendo's publishing on CD, which it took them a long time to get, or not Nintendo, but Nintendo's properties being published on CD. It took them a long time for Nintendo to circle back to that medium.
They kept. Until the GameCube, right? So and even then they couldn't just do it straight. They had to do the mini DVDs, like a proprietary mini DVD. So they went out struggling with that stuff.
Totally.
That era is so interesting to me because, as I mentioned earlier, experimentation in video games is my favorite thing. And maybe you played it, but the game Another World or Out of This World in the US was my reason of becoming a game developer and working in any video games, because it's just so otherworldly and different, and it just took me off my feet when I was young. And when I look at things like even the Jaguar to a certain extent, but like 3DO, CDI, they were trying so many new cool things within
Totally.
FMVs, within just uh, data streaming, as you mentioned, like audio streaming. The Need for Speed on 3DO had like this huge levels, if you remember.
It was amazing.
Yeah, it was incredible at the time. You don't get that so much anymore. It's a little bit more streamlined, I
Standardized.
guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Well,
we
there's
all
so many
use-
people involved, and everybody's got the same engine, and it's
yeah,
all
it's all
sort of-
Unreal, a Unity.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
kind of come from the same DNA, so it's something where the games that I've been working on, I've been fortunate enough that I could kind of work on smaller indie games,
Yeah.
and do some experimentation. And yeah, that was kind of one of the reasons, especially that when Seth and I started talking, that like this is a game I really want to work on.
That's so awesome.
yeah,
Seth,
yeah.
let's go back a little bit here. Okay, so you've
Sure,
played
yeah.
the games, and
Mhm.
had you already been making other games, like as an indie developer?
Yeah.
What was
I mean,
what was your vantage point there?
So I had been making like smaller projects for like a long time, like most indie devs will tell you, like, you make like dozens of tiny crap games, I guess you could say, just to sort of like figure out what you're doing.
Yeah,
And
go to game
so-
jams and stuff like that.
right. So what one of the sort of like inspirations for the project was, well, I want to do something like a little like the fan made remaster project. I want to do something like a little more, ambitious, I guess you could say.
Sure.
And and like a lot of other creatives, I had problems finishing things. My friends, we had sort of been talking about, well, around the time that I was thinking about doing this, Nintendo was releasing a lot of those HD remasters of
Sure.
games, right? So
Yeah.
the joke was, well, what if one of those existed for the other Zelda games that nobody talks about? And so it sort of like was a very opportune, like, I bet I could do this. It was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be, as with most projects, with all game development. But yeah, eventually, a few years later, I started cranking through it, and I released them. I thought a dozen of my friends would think they were funny, but no. Apparently, a lot of people were very interested in these games. Still, it was not as niche as I had thought it was.
Well, I mean, it's these are the biggest brands in gaming, and it's such an interesting corner of the mythology around these brands.
Right.
I would imagine that even if people weren't familiar with them, they wanted to be, right? And that's got
sort
to
of
be
what-
part of
yeah.
the impetus for this Arzette coming out as well, right? I mean, there's a
Yes,
tie to all that.
absolutely.
So, but
Yeah,
let me ask, what did your colleagues and friends and contemporaries think of your idea to remaster Seedy Eye Games?
Oh, as any good friend would tell you, they'd be like, "You're crazy. What's wrong with you?" But no, they were like, "Well, that would be cool if you did that." And so I was like, "I bet it would be pretty neat. If you take the games, but like sort of remake them and make them like more playable and everything. But
Put in
still
the fun.
right? A little
Yeah.
a little more fun.
Yeah.
But so that was that project, and then that was part of it was proving to myself that I could make a game like of this like kind of scope. So
What did you do? Let's talk remaster here for a second. But what did you do with the
Sure.
animated cut sequences and everything? Did you yourself redo those, or how did you do them?
So all of the assets for those games had already been sort of like taken out of the games, ripped by the community a long time ago. That was one of the
Oh, okay.
reasons. What made it sort of viable was that I could sort of like reverse engineer. It wasn't as difficult to reverse engineer everything. I just sort of had to program it all together and sort of design it around a little bit out of the existing assets. But like the cutscenes, I actually did it the same way that they did it in the original games, which is they're
Mhm.
just transparent bitmaps that play back synced with audio. I mean, that's what they did on the CDI. And I remade the games in GameMaker, and back then there wasn't any video playback in GameMaker, so it did have to basically be giant sprites that talked back to you, just kind of like what they did on the CDI.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
crazy.
It was a lot
And
of
so,
work.
while you were doing that, was that
Mhm.
when you had the idea for Arzette, or did you have a bit of time and reflect on that and went, well, this is a cool way to come out with something that's going to register in this very noisy world of games that we have now?
Honestly, sort of a little bit of both. I had sort of always kicked that idea around of doing a game like those games because a lot of my friends that are working on the game with me, they are professional artists and animators, and they have the same sort of weird love for these games that I do. And so, sometimes we talked and be like, I would love to make cutscenes like that, or I would love to try to do something like that. So it's always something that I like kicked around. But then, especially after the remasters came out and people seemed to be very like receptive, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. The idea is there. I know what I want to do. I've got people that want to help me make it, and then I sort of was like, hey, I'm going to make a spiritual successor to these games. And I announced it to the world, and that's where Audi comes in.
And Audi, had you played the remasters of the Seedy Eye games? Were you familiar with what Seth had been doing?
Yeah. So it was kind of via Digital Foundry. It was before I joined Limited Run as an official employee. And I was working for another game developer at the time as a day job. But when he released those remasters, because at DF, I was very well known for being like the Seedy Eye guy. I collect Seedy Eye games and just have a general love for underappreciated games, or bad games, as other people say for some reason. And people had started like adding me at Twitter and stuff, saying like, "Hey, you need to check this out. There's someone who remade the Zelda Seedy Eye games." And actually, this happens quite often, that like someone has a kind of vertical slice of something, or have done a game, remade it. And generally what I always find is that the person has kind of captured an element, but the full package isn't quite there. So maybe like the game looks exactly like it used to, but the physics are off when you control it. Maybe it plays better, but all the aesthetics of it is kind of off because they had to remake the graphics, something like that. So I kind of held off on playing them, thinking, I don't know if people understood the kind of allure of the Seedy Eye game, so I'll wait till next week to check them out. And so John and I fired them up like a week later, and we couldn't believe it, because here was not only, to Steph's credit, it was like, not only were these remastered in the sense that now they ran at 60 frames per second, they controlled better, they were much more accessible, but he had also included a mode to replicate the actual performance of the Seedy Eye.
Jesus, that's fantastic.
So we were like, so not only did he kind of understand
how
to better the elements, but he also understood how they operated in their least.
That's so important, isn't it? I mean, if we're talking about preservation and going back and looking at these classic things, you need to access the classic stuff, even if it's not how you play it. You need to see it, and future generations need to know it. Why bother doing this work if that's not available, right? Yeah. No, I think that's amazing.
And this is something that frustrated me a lot during like the PlayStation 2 era, when we got all these compilations. It was like huge lists of games, but they were always emulated poorly, blurry, stretched. It was like, man, you're not experiencing these games the way they are supposed to be experienced, and that sometimes that means kind of warts and blemishes included. And we were just perplexed that this guy had understood the fundamentals of it on a Seedy Eye level, I guess you could say, or like on a lesser level, and also from that extract the potential and make them really playable. Because once you play them with proper controls, better hit detection and things like that, the games are very much akin to something like Monster World or Wonder Boy, like that kind of adventure game, and you kind of immediately see, oh, that's what we're trying to do. Oh, okay, like that's not that bad. It's like,
and the only thing that prevented that was that they didn't have any hardware to help them make the game.
The only thing that prevented that was the console they made it for. So too bad it's an exclusive. So it's like we were very impressed by it, and I think, if I recall correctly, I reached out to you, Seth, and just kind of give you some praise for it, and turned out you were a big fan of ours. and already very familiar with our content, and which is kind of like, hey, thanks so much for reaching out. Hope you like my next game. It's like, next game, you say?
Yeah.
Tell me more about this next game. And yeah, that's when you kind of laid it on me. Just kind of like, you wanted to do something moving on from your remasters,
right,
and their improved method of play. You wanted to see how far you could take that on the original IP. And I found this really interesting because there is a lot of potential in those original Seedy Eye Zelda games. No matter, people will have watched YouTube, and they will have sometimes played them for emulation and just been like, there was no potential. They're just bad games. But it's like, no. If you look beyond those first impressions, hand-painted backgrounds, that was very unlike anything you had seen. And what that means is, rather than being tile-based, a repeating square that formulates a background, a hand-painted background means every step is unique. No matter where you walk in the game, it's something different. In 1992, no one was doing this.
Right. All that performance work too, right? There wasn't a lot of that stuff back then either.
Nope. Voice acting and animation, and just atmosphere and music was another huge thing.
Right.
So, and it was Seth's first game, and luckily for Seth, I'm an expert at producing bad games. So I was like, would you? As I was working, I was working for another developer at the time, and I was like, I would be willing to help you out here. Do you want me to join you on this? And he was like, yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of when we formed the beginnings of our team, which was is it 3 years ago now?
It was almost 3 years ago. Yep.
Yeah, 3 years ago.
So is Arzette done? Is it finished?
Pretty much.
Very close.
Yeah,
very close.
We're
very cool.
polishing and optimizing right now. I think there's some frames of animation still waiting to come in, because we are doing the animations similarly to how the old ones are. So they are basically hand-drawn bitmaps, frame by frame.
Yeah, and the backgrounds are also all hand-painted, just like those original games. All original paintings, yeah.
Are you in touch with the previous creators of the Zelda games? I know that you have some of the voice performers, you have some of the actors in this new game from the Seedy Eye Zelda games.
Yep.
But did you actually reach out to any of the animators or any of the developers, or are they in this web of people that are helping to put all this together?
So what we did, I was able to reach out to Rob Dunleavy, one of the original background artists on the game.
Okay,
and,
cool.
And he's actually doing some art for the game.
That's great.
World map and a few levels, yeah. But I did try to reach out to as many people as I could. But as you might imagine, 30 years ago is a long time for a project that they may or may not have the fondest memories of.
Right. Yeah. Some resumes may have had erasers over some of these stuff.
Yeah, it's a lot of wipe markings on some of those papers. And also, this is something that came up early in our discussions starting to develop it, was kind of how much of legacy do we want to include here? Yeah. And I was very adamant because I worked on a couple other projects that were based on previous properties, and then bringing back previous talent is really exciting, but also brings with it kind of, as Seth mentioned, it's been 30 years ago, 25 years ago. It takes a long time sometimes for people to get back into the spirit of what they were doing. Sometimes it's just kind of lost. And also, not that it hinders, but it sometimes creatively can become, you want to be respectful. And when you have too many legacy people involved, who had the creative idea 30 years ago, it's kind of like, well, I don't want to step on their toes and say like, well, we're doing it this way now. So we want,
there's an element of reinterpretation, right?
Absolutely.
Like you're not just making it again, you're reinterpreting it for modern players and finding value for them today.
And we want to do our own thing as well, too. I never wanted to just make like a copy. I wanted, like Audi said, I wanted to sort of lean into what those original games were doing, but then sort of like take it to its most logical conclusion and make it as best as it could be without having to, like you said, worry about having to be within sort of artificial constraints. Like that.
Yeah.
So how far along were you with the game, kind of working by yourself and with your friends before Limited Run came in? And tell me how that relationship, what did that mean for you? Was that a bigger budget? Was that more assets that you could employ? What changed?
The game wouldn't be the dream Seedy Eye spiritual successor that it is without their help. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
But
yeah, there's a funny story to all that.
Yeah, no, it is a really funny story. I'll tell a little bit of it. So for a long time, I had made a vertical slice that was really ugly. That didn't really. It was using like temporary graphics, and then
It's like squiggles and like black and white. Paper scans of the background.
It gets the point across if you use your
Microsoft Paint version.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay.
So
toddler version.
So Audi eventually was just fed up and was like, you know what? How about you just take some of my money and make something that's worthwhile?
Thank you for mentioning that, Seth. I'll write that down.
It's
every interview this has come
every
up.
single time.
So yeah,
you're gonna expense this, Audi. Josh, we got to talk.
I need a higher percentage on this. No, so why? Because I was working for a different developer, and that was not a game that necessarily fit that developer. It was a Japanese developer, or mostly a Japanese company publishing in the West, and we had pitched it to them. Obviously, I try to do as much conflict of interest in my life as I can. So I had brought it back to my company.
Yeah, you're media and a producer, and you're making games. Yeah, it's good. Just cross all the lines, buddy.
You gotta do it. Seth had made a vertical slice to kind of get the idea across. And for us, the idea was very apparent, but for other people, it was a Seedy Eye Zelda game, which somehow was a very difficult pitch. So as we discovered, I didn't anticipate this. It was a bigger problem than I thought. So when it had gone a while, we had pitched it around a little bit, and I kind of identified that first impression just ain't that good, Seth.
Right.
It's just you have like this really unfinished, unpolished game, and then you say it's based on a Seedy Eye game. It's like we're going into a double negative here,
right?
And so I took
wishing for disaster.
Set us. Got to make this as hard for me as possible. And at the time I had left that developer. That we had been. It had been like 6 months, a year of kind of just like prototyping, and I was like, I have the severance. I could spend it on my wife and have a great time, but do you want it? And you were, I'll give you this. Yeah. But I told Seth, straight up, it's like, I believe in this project. Even if I can't be involved with it anymore, I want to, I'll give you this amount. It will pay for the assets you need, the animation you need, and you'll have a demo. And that's all I want. I just want to see the game succeed. And Seth immediately got the right people involved, got the assets made, and I was hired by Limited Run. And on my very first day at the office at Limited Run, I told Seth prior to arriving, I was like, I think my goodwill at Limited Run is going to run out real fast when they discover who I am. Why don't you come down on day one? Come down on my very first day and pitch the game. And because at the very least, on my first day, I think I'll be able to not screw up. So Seth came down to Limited Run's offices on that first day. I was there. I'd been there for I was there. I'd been there for 2.5 hours, hiding in the bathroom. And I came out and we were ready. It's like we went into Josh's office and it didn't take long.
No.
You showed that demo. He saw the animations. Like, are you making a new Seedy Eye Zelda game? And you were like, yes.
Absolutely.
And I could see in your eyes. You were like, oh, we're going into this again. And
Josh is into it. Yes.
Josh loved it. And he was like, yeah, we got to do this. You don't need to show me anything here. I'll do this. And then remember, he was asking Seth, what's the budget here? Where are you getting your funding from? And you mentioned at the time you had a different day job, Seth.
Mm-hmm.
I think you were a mortgage.
Yeah, almost 10 years I was a mortgage.
So you were like,
Mortgage.
oh,
Oh,
I
wow.
have some savings. You know, I have my paychecks. I'm gonna like, and Josh just like, why don't we just fund it? You know, this looks like something that Limited Run would love to be associated with. And yeah, they gave you, you know, a great budget to fulfill your dream. So
That's great, man. So did they reimburse all the money that you'd put in, or I mean, it's
No.
getting pretty into the weeds here, but
no.
No.
So my divorce proceedings are still ongoing.
Yeah, we're still working through those.
Yeah. Luckily, I have Seth.
That's
right. Forever and
man.
always.
Well, Jesus, talk about like finding the right two guys to do this. That's amazing.
Honestly, yes, it really does. Sometimes it feels like
The world brought you
stars are
together.
crossing. Yeah, yeah.
That's so cool,
Crazy.
man. Okay, so but Arzette isn't just a sequel. It's not a Seedy Eye game. It is a modern game that takes inspiration. And I see John Linneman is involved from Digital Foundry as well. He's a level designer, which is so cool. And like, how do you describe this game for people that may not have the exact same fondness for the CDI as you two might have?
I mean, it's a hand-painted action platformer with charming cutscenes. Like, there's so I had my first public demo at PAX a few weeks ago, and if you can believe it, a lot of people who went by were like, what is this? Like, they have no idea what the CDI is, right?
Yeah.
So even they would sit down.
That's most people.
That's most people. And you know,
we're gonna change that one day.
Right, we'll change it. Anyway, they sat down with it and they really liked it, which made me feel a lot better. And they understood what I was going for without having to have that context. But if you have that context, it just makes it even better.
Yeah. That's great, man. Hey, go ahead, Audi.
Like we mentioned earlier, it's like when you take all of those elements that they use, the hand-painted backgrounds and the adventure, like the slightly non-linear adventure setting,
Right.
The combat, it turns into something akin to like Monster Boy recently.
Yep.
It kind of like a 2D side-scrolling adventure game.
That's great.
But with, you know, the thing about the Zelda CDI games was that like all the characters had very individual, distinct characteristics and personalities. So we were able to inject this a lot more than some other games could. And I think even if you don't have that context of the CDI, you do have context of what this kind of like traditional sprawling 2D adventure gaming is. Right. And that's kind of where we wanted to go with this, was to take those elements that people recognize for the CDI, but contextualize them into a modern 2D gaming setting. And to Seth's credit, I think he absolutely nailed that aspect of it.
That's so cool. And I think, guys, like from an outsider's perspective too, it's so unique to see this kind of bespoke, hand-drawn, handcrafted, not perfect look to things, you know, like everything is so polished to a T in modern gaming. And it's great to see the rougher edges and to see the individualism that is being applied to the development here. And I think people are going to respond to that in a big way.
We got real lucky that like AI turned into such a controversial thing recently, because in this game we have like someone
human made.
Like, you see very much
an artist.
Like, sometimes I looked at some of those like mistakes, I guess. I mean, it's just interpretations, it's artistic creativity, and I love that stuff. But sometimes it's like, man, that like this part looks a bit off, and now I'm like, keep it, because that just means like someone did that.
Did you see the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem movie?
Yes.
Oh, I did.
I love that movie. Yeah.
It was cool. I mean, and part of it is just how broken stuff looks, and misshapen and weird, and it was like, wow. Yes, go for it. You know, I think the games industry needs like a human-made stamp that they can put on games.
I think games need to be made by humans.
Yes, they do.
So,
Arzette is very much an artist-driven game. Like I said, I like my in college I went for like art, basically a BA in art, but
cool.
I'm so sorry.
So no, exactly.
Good jobs with that.
It went very well. Anyway, Yeah, and a lot of the people that are working on Arzette they're artists, right? So like, and it was important to me that I'm glad people have been able to latch onto that. Like, we're going express yourself, like really like put a, I'm not going to be like, this needs to be this. Like I want to make sure that there's a lot of artistic freedom being given within that kind of framework. And I think people can tell. I think they, when they play it, when they see the scenes, they're like, okay, like this has personality, and that was really important for me. So really happy that's showing through. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the response, because you guys have pre-orders for this already, or can people purchase the game already, or where is it set up right now? Not yet. Okay.
So we announced it at LRG3 this summer, which is LRG's like E3 show.
Yep.
And the response for it was incredible. I mean, having worked with Seth at that point, like 2.5 years on it.
Congratulations, you guys.
Yeah,
it was.
That's wonderful.
It was overwhelming.
It's like you think about it all the time. Like, okay, it's got to be announced one day, and you kind of have an image in your mind for it. And having worked on a lot of games, I always have a slightly reserved expectation, especially for indie games today. It's like, I think the response will be great. I think it will be positive, but I don't think it's gonna like, spread. I think it's going to be very much within the community, and that's great. Yeah. That's what we're targeting.
Especially this year, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
How does anybody make any noise anywhere? How do huge games at like 3 months later or 3 weeks later, half the team is laid off? Like, what the hell is happening? It's crazy.
That was what was so funny about this, was that, there's an original IP, brand new, 2D adventure game, and we were breaking records, and like it was seen by millions of people.
That's awesome.
And, within days it was like 100,000 unique views on YouTube. Across every statistics we had, it was like in the millions. And I have a good friend who works higher up at Bethesda, and I was at Gamescom recently, and he was like, yeah, it sure feels good when your Seedy Eye Zelda game thingy made more of a splash than Starfield at the time. I love that. And I was like, yeah, which means we're doing it right. Next Bethesda game, Seedy Eye. And as we gone, but that's first impressions. And I think for Seth it was completely overwhelming, but I was just like floored. People were doing fan arts immediately. They were doing YouTube cuts. It just like exploded, and then the thought is like, well, can we maintain this momentum? Right. And lo and behold, it's been growing steadily. Even like right now, we're getting more traction than we did when it was announced. And people are like at PAX, people were coming over to play it all the time, and we get inquiries about it all the time. It's just it's become one of Limited Run's kind of more popular titles within months. And we have an 8-year history now, and it's not on sale yet. It's coming on sale.
Is it going to be this year, or is it going to be in 2024? What are you guys thinking right now?
We don't know yet. It kind of depends a little bit on a lot of other things, but the game itself. About kind of buying patterns and whatnot, purchasing patterns. So, but it will be very soon. It won't be a long wait, regardless. 2023 is almost over. So, regardless of where it lands.
I would suggest waiting. All
right, let me write this down.
I would suggest.
Says wait. I'll send that to my boss.
I think it's just
you can
so
CC me on that one.
I'll see how that goes. And I don't know. I mean, it's so unique. It's going to make noise no matter when it comes out.
Yeah,
but it's just such a crowded time. It really is. Is there going to be a CDI version of Arzette?
No. Let me shoot this down immediately. So that would be really funny.
Yeah.
But that would also mean that like we'd have to spend years optimizing this down to something that the CDI could run.
Yeah.
And homebrew on CDI in general, finding development libraries for it is very difficult. And Philips themselves, I don't think, have really maintained much of the history of the CDI. I don't think their archives have much in the ways of documentation. So even if we would go official and become an official of CDI as developer,
How many
I just
copies
don't
do you think that'll sell? How many copies do you think?
How many
10?
friends do you have?
Like 300.
about
You've
a
been
dozen.
mentioning all these
Yeah.
friends.
100.
So,
Yeah. So yeah, that's no.
I mean, that is something that Limited Run does a lot, though. We do develop for.
It's in the
All
name.
hardware.
Yeah, I mean, and we have put out new Mega Drive games and things like this. So it's not out of the realm of possibility of doing
You need to find like a 20-year-old Seth Fulkerson who wants to demake your CDI reverence game and make it playable on the CDI.
We just need a time machine at this point. Just go back to that era. It's like, forget that Zelda thing, man. Arzette's the new business.
Who are you?
Yeah.
Get out of here.
How did you get here?
Let's talk a little bit about this, the limited run philosophy. And Audi, despite your reservations or your projections of you not being appreciated over there, I couldn't think of a better fit for your personality and your love of classic game history and software than working at Limited Run. You guys brought out Trip World, or is that out already? I don't know. Did it come
Trip
out?
World, yes, Trip World is coming out digitally very soon. Pre-orders for it went up a few months ago. I mean, absolutely, Limited Run has been the best job I've ever had in the industry, and I worked in the industry since 2001, believe it or not. Started as an intern at Funcom. And
amazing.
It's just a company that very much bases itself around making dreams reality. That means for both consumers as well as us at the team. And we mentioned it a few times, but like Josh is just really generous human being. He really shouldn't be a boss of a company because he's just too nice, and I'm not.
Well, he should be the boss of this company. It feels like.
Thank God he
is.
Right? Because it's just a joy to come to work every day, and I can't speak for how they look at me, but I do hope I'm a good fit for them. I've had a lot of fun and success so far, so I can't shower them with enough praise because it's hard, it's being a limited physical print company comes with a lot of caveats, especially during the pandemic. Things got delayed. It became hard to get things out in time.
Right.
So I do see, I work in the development. I work in the development wing of Limited Run, and so I do see like how production gets kind of hit with a lot of negativity surrounding that. But man, I've never worked at a company where people worked harder at making everyone happy. Because I've certainly been in companies in Japan as well as the US where the consumer was very much an afterthought, and any type of criticism, any type of kind of feedback was discarded very quickly. At Limited Run weekly, we sit down and talk about what
would be cool for people
saying, what would be cool for them, how we can make everyone happy. And it's very unlike any other company I've been with.
Oh, that's amazing to hear. I haven't been to any of the physical locations. I did see the Limited Run booth at PAX, though. I thought it was awesome. I thought it, there was lots of people milling around it, and it was all this physical media, and it was.
You probably saw Seth then. If you
I was there.
I was passing by. I was hosting at Nintendo Live, so I was pretty.
Congrats,
burnt.
by the way. You did a great job. I heard.
I had an amazing time. It was so cool, but I couldn't believe how tired I was every day. I was only a couple hours, but every day I was like just expelling all of this energy, and then I was like, because I'm used to running around at these conventions like crazy, but it's different when you're up on stage and like trying to keep your stuff together. And then I would walk around PAX. I'm like, oh my God, I don't have time to talk or energy to talk to anybody.
Right.
So I never really stopped, but I did take a look, and the Limited Run presence was appreciated. It looked really cool, and people looked happy, which is really damn important. And they're able to walk away with stuff, right? Which I think is super.
They can buy physical games, which is, especially nowadays with store takedowns and all this stuff. It's more important than ever to preserve and enjoy. And there's a satisfaction and enjoyment of owning something that I think people are discarding very quickly these days. But
Let me ask you
curse-
something, Audie, because
Yeah, go
this
ahead.
is a question that I've had, because I visited the Polymega offices and
I've been there too.
and those guys are like Brian Burnell, who I've interviewed a few times. Like, they're so passionate about exactly the same thing. And then I just got the email notification that new analog pockets are going to be available for about a second.
Transparent ones.
I got that too. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, but people can't get these damn things. They can't get the hardware, and it seems like the perfect marriage is limited run working with these companies that are trying to make hardware that would play these classic pieces of software.
Yeah.
So make that happen.
Yeah, this is something that's talked about all the time, and it's just a matter of kind of like finding the right partners and them, scaling production up to a company of the size of Limited Run isn't that easy. Because a lot of the analog, fantastic products, but the Pocket is probably one of the best gaming devices ever made. It is the best way of playing handheld games, especially Game Boy. And for something like Trip World DX, which you mentioned earlier, I've been prototyping it on the Pocket. It's just, there's no other way.
Dude, every time I go to buy one, guess what?
It's hard. And that's not. I think it's important to note that the supply chain for a lot of the parts that they use at the quality they use it's difficult still. The pandemic is still being felt, especially in hardware. Right. So I think they definitely want to push these out at a faster rate, I would imagine so. But it's really hard. But it is something that we discuss a lot internally. It would be great to have a device with all these retro cartridges that we do, and for old and new games, to make it easier for people to play, and that they get played back correctly. Because there have been devices I'm not going to mention companies, but there's been Sega Genesis devices where it's just they destroy the games. So they're not really selling the quality that much there on either the games or the hardware. So you have to be careful, and then when you found those people, you have to scale it up to several thousands, if not tens of thousands. And man, that's a production line that's very hard to facilitate overnight.
It drives me nuts, because I know, just like the record store boom happened and it became a very big part of the market again. A retro video game store where you could walk in and buy new machines that play classic software. And that software could do very well as well. But somebody's got to,
we do have a retail location up in North Carolina in Cary. There's a limited run retail, which please do come down and visit us.
I would love to.
And there you can buy pre-owned classic legacy software as well as limited run games. It's really neat.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
One of the things I always think about walking in there is, it would be cool if we had some sort of device that people could come in and pick up these games, these cartridges, and be like, this will play back perfectly for you on your OLED set or your 1080p TV, whatever it is, because that's, there's a lot of things to take into factor here, right? It's input lag and whatnot. If you just get a Super Nintendo, plug those components with a HDMI converter, like a cheap one, it's gonna look real blurry. You're gonna have input lag of several seconds. It's not gonna feel great. It's not gonna look great. So I wish there was a way for us to kind of get that out to people properly.
There is. I mean, I have the two analog. We're getting deep into the weeds here with this stuff, but I love it. I love it too, though. I have the analog Mega SG and the Super NT, and I freaking adore those things.
Incredible.
They're incredible. And I'm also a big fan of what Polymega did too, because of all the CD based. Library that I have. I don't have any Seedy Eye Games, guys. I'm sorry to tell you, but I have lots of every other CD format. Someday, it is my dream. Not really, but
it will be.
I'll come over to Audie's place and we'll play. That would be awesome.
By all means, you can sleep in the room where I got it stored, just so you can play all night. But
I do think that people would go nuts. I mean, I
when
believe
you look
that.
I think you're right too. You look at perception. Video games have changed, and the way people look at that. I mean, we all grown older, right? And people my age have several children now. We want to kind of introduce our kids to the things that we grew up with. It's not dissimilar to how it was. Remember when I was growing up, Addams Family and things like that came out in new movies, right? It was all these things from the 50s and 60s that, my dad was like, oh, I remember watching that on TV. You should go watch it.
Yeah.
And luckily they got the MC Hammer to do the theme song. So it was cool for me. It was cool for him. And I think video games are in that kind of zone right now where it's the perfect opportunity to kind of put something out because it's the immediacy of retro gaming is not just niche and kind of like, well, old stuff. I think there is an aspect of like the pick up and play and immediacy of reading the screen and understanding immediately. Like Super Mario is the perfect example of how looking at the first screen teaches you everything you need to know about what Mario can do. And kids especially read that stuff. They're developing and they are learning in a different way that you and I are. So I think retro gaming can be so good for like hand and eye coordination and just like visually reading a screen. They can still be valuable.
Fun doesn't dissipate, when you hear an old song, it still can get to you emotionally, even if you have heard it a billion times and you don't want to hear it, and then you do hear it. It's like, God damn it got me again. And I think classic games can do that too. I think fun doesn't have an expiry date, and to play some of this classic stuff, it kind of pisses me off actually that this has been a year where it's just been so many new things that I haven't had much time to play much classic stuff, because that has been thanks to companies like Limited Run and Polymega and Analog and lots of other companies that are in this in this space. It felt like this resurgence and this real sort of acceptance that the classic stuff is still vital and still very necessary. And honestly, Xbox to a degree and Nintendo to a degree and now PlayStation to a degree as well, they're all offering their customers at least a little bit of their respective histories. Not enough.
Not enough, no. And for my end at Limited Run, we develop a lot of these compilations. We just released Jurassic Park for pre-order, so it has the classic Super Nintendo and Genesis games in them. And preserving those games is so important to us because there's so much technology and so much. I'm forgetting the English words for things now, but there's just so much incredible stuff being done on the hardware that there was for, like the Super Nintendo. The Jurassic Park games have like incredible music. They have all these weird effects and the 3D stages you probably remember, right? When you went into these different places, and it has real 3D on the Super Nintendo without the Super FX, where you navigate the visitor center and all that stuff. And then you have like the digitized graphics of the Sega Genesis games. And it's just like all this stuff needs preserved so people can enjoy them and see where we came from. Because now we have all these games releasing month to month on Unreal Engine 5 and whatnot that look incredible and have these shaders and but I don't think people have that same understanding and enjoyment of how they got there. And a lot of that is still seen, especially in the mid 90s. A lot of that technology led to what we have right now. You can see, if you watch a video from John Limman at DF Retro, you see so many times that the technology from 1998 is the technology that inspired what we have right now in 2023.
Well, and game concepts and game design ripples back all the way through. That's why Roblox pisses me right off, because we're getting a whole generation of kids, my kid included, who are playing like classic designs with really crappy graphics, and it's all just ripped off. It's just like ripped that, and they're using licensed music and licensed
all
stuff
the time.
It's brutal.
John's kid plays that too.
It's it's the community thing, and people like that creative expression, and I get it, but oh man, this conversation's going everywhere, which is great. But don't you think it's nuts that Sony built Dreams and then said, no, we'll let Roblox just take that whole business away? It's crazy, man. Oh man, it's so nuts. Seth, what do you want to do now? Are you gonna be a retro leaning game maker enthusiast for your career, or do you want to make a modern game using an Unreal Engine 5? Like, what do you want to do next?
I would like to keep looking at retro concepts, like games maybe that had like less than love designed, and sort of like take them to their next logical conclusion. I think that's been, this project especially has been so much fun for both a design exercise and just everything else that goes into it. And so yeah, I think I wanna keep going in that direction. And
awesome.
I think it's not too dangerous to say we've definitely got some ideas for the future. But
wicked. Do you have an Atari Lynx?
Oh, I would love one. Anybody want to give me a Lynx? Yeah, of course.
The Lynx was so freaking cool. Those big chunky pixels, like just the squareness of all of their game concepts. I love the Lynx. I'd love to see new games that kind of take a little bit of that inspiration.
Yeah, Lynx never got to where it needed to be, right? But the way the way those games look, and honestly, the graphical quality, picture quality at the time was unheard of.
It was amazing.
This is when the Game Boy came out. It's not something that came out like several years later and was like a Game Gear situation. I mean, this was competing with, and honestly, in many aspects, deserved a lot more praise. So yeah, I'm also a huge proponent of kind of Lynx homebrew is pretty interesting. I went to Jagfest in Germany a few years ago, which is the Atari Jaguar festival, where there's a lot of enthusiasts for Atari Lynx and Atari Jaguar there. And they were having these stations with Lynx homebrew that blew me away. I couldn't believe what they were achieving. So it's pretty active. And there's definitely viability of doing a Lynx game in the future.
Love it. I love it. You guys couldn't be a better match for each other. I can't wait to play this game. I'm so excited to see where, Limited Run is going to be taking us. I love seeing all the announcements. I love seeing John pop up in this stuff, and I've never met Modern Vintage Gamer, but I think he's so cool, and it's great to see him sort of interwoven into all of this as well.
I got to work with him every day, and he's an incredible person. The team I work with from MVG, Joe Modulewski, Pete, they're all just incredible human beings first and foremost, but also incredible talent. So it's just, I'm very spoiled in my life that I get to work with these guys. And John always pops up. He's also in Plumbers Don't Wear Ties.
Yes.
Defensive edition, which when we're doing that interview.
Yeah, we definitely need to do that. And I'm thinking that we need to do a DF, retro, LRG, MVG kind of combo.
I think
all the acronyms.
I think you just need to come to our office and visit and just have us all there.
Please, yes.
Do a tour of our store, and we'll have to set something like that up.
Well, John's over in Europe too, right? So bring him.
Yeah, he's in Europe. I'm mostly North Carolina now, but I do go back. I have family in Europe, obviously, and I do always stop by John's to do projects and whatnot. But John pops in at the office here and there. He's kind of close to Seth.
We're good friends.
He's from Ohio, right? Cincinnati.
Yes.
He's from the Nasty Natty.
So whenever he comes to visit, I usually say hello. So.
Yeah, and it was very natural for him to join Arzette. He's doing level design. So I always, I joined the F many years ago, and it was at a time where I didn't think I was going to do much more in gaming for different reasons, and they picked me up and just saved my life, really. So I always stay very loyal to the F and John for that reason.
It's a very special thing that you guys are all building up over there. Just the adoration and the intelligence and the detail that you get into. I'm a huge fan, and I'm just happy to see that has spilled over into actual products and actual development. It's kind of like putting your money where your mouth is. Like you guys clearly have been wearing these badges of honor and love for the classics, and now you're making new ones, which is really freaking cool.
Yeah, and not just because I work there, but that is one thing that Limited Run can say, which not many other companies can say, is that like these projects would not exist without the support of Limited Run. It's just their ability to see potential in things that other publishers or developers would just look at and be, there's no market for this. You know, for Josh, it's always like, we can make a market for this, and it's so refreshing to be back in a video game space where someone says like, we can make this into something, rather than just saying there is no market for this. Because I'm so used to hearing that, and I've never heard Josh say, you know, just no, there's no one would buy this. He never says that. So
well, I think Limited Run needs a retail store in Canada, and I recommend Vancouver to be that destination.
Yes. I'm not surprised that was the location. I'm sure they would love to open more locations. The one in Cary is real neat, though.
It's very cool.
I can't wait for you to see it sometime. But
let's make it happen.
Yeah, let's do it.
I would love it. Well, thank you both, you guys. Good luck with Arzette, and what an amazing story this whole thing is. It's you guys got to invite me to your wedding whenever that's going to happen. It's going to be a magical day. You guys
get married again.
You guys are.
We'll go to Salt Lake.
We'll go.
You'll be fine in Salt
I think they're fine there. Yeah.
Seth, thank you so much, and Audi, great to have you on the show. And
thank you for bringing me on.
Yes, let's reconnect and do another one for sure. Yeah, you guys are the best. And thank you all for watching and listening. Remember to hit that subscribe button and give me a thumbs up if you dig the show and the channel. And we'll see you soon. Until then, play forever.